Welcome back to the core of the story, the corner of the internet where the spotlight tilts away from the headlines and towards the pulse underneath it all. This is Turkish series stars. History loves its cannon blasts and confetti showers, but the heart makes its biggest moves in the quiet. As the calendar slipped from 2025 into 2026, the entertainment world was primed for spectacle. Stages were set, champagne breathed on ice, and the skyline of fame glittered like it always does on the first night of a new year. Yet for two of Turkey's most talked about figures, the new year didn't arrive with cheers. It arrived with a verdict. We are talking about the magnetic Yaman and the steadfast Demet. Their names have long been braided into rumors, red carpets, and that particular tension created when on-screen chemistry spills into public curiosity. But what unfolded in the earliest hours of January 1st went past gossip. It was a collision between a man realizing he'd been standing still and a woman who finally learned how to keep walking. Today, we are not here to trade in empty chatter, we're looking at the anatomy of a heartbreak that crossed borders. We'll drift from the diamond-bright skyline of Dubai to the cold fluorescence of Istanbul's arrivals hall. We'll parse a message typed too late and the reply that finished a chapter without a scream. Before we step into those shadows, ask yourself this: have you ever understood the worth of something only when you saw it glowing in someone else's hands? If these deeper portraits of your favorite stars matter to you, hit that subscribe and stay with Turkish series stars. And for those who want to keep independent storytelling alive and gain access to our inner circle, the join button is waiting below. Your support lets us keep digging where the headlines refuse to go. Let's step into the night that turned the page. To comprehend the coming fall, you have to feel the height. The setting was Dubai, a desert mirage turned into a gold-plated fact, a city where imagination becomes architecture. On New Year's Eve, the Burj Khalifa didn't just light the sky. It stitched it into neon. At the center of that glow stood Yaman. He has spent years as the compass in any room, velvet ropes unhooked at a glance, cameras crackling like tame lightning, a crowd tuned to his frequency. By every reasonable measure, it should have been a victory lap. Offers floated to his ear like silk, introductions were made with the polish that can lock down a decade, and every bass drop promised a tomorrow bigger than today. But as the countdown slid towards midnight, witnesses say something shifted inside him, a tilt invisible to everyone but the man feeling the slide. While the world readied itself to shout one, he stared into a quiet that drowned the music. The blow didn't come from a rival at the table. It didn't come from a producer's cold shoulder or a deal gone brittle. It came from the blue light of a phone. One swipe, one image, demure, unadorned, and devastating. It was a photograph posted by Demet. No glitter, no red carpet, no mirrors of gold. It looked like a morning light had wandered across her face and stayed there. Calm. Composed. The public hadn't seen that unguarded serenity on her in years. She looked like someone who had fought a private battle and finally laid her armor down. She wasn't alone. Next to her stood a man, unnamed to the audience, unknown to the rumor mill, yet framed with the intimacy of a life shared. Not a scandalous embrace, but something far more threatening to any ex, an image that breathed domestic ease. For the feeds, it was fuel. A rumor to chew. A new angle for the never-ending commentary. But for Can, looking at that screen in the middle of a party roaring its approval, it read like a mirror that refused to flatter. The simple cheer in her caption, the hope threaded between the words, hit him with the force of a door closing. People nearby say the change in him was instant. The party glow dropped from his gaze. His laugh, usually on standby, didn't come. As fireworks cracked and the clock's last seconds vanished, Can went quiet in a way that turned the air around him thin. Luxury tasted like dust. The deals, the favors, the currency of fame felt counterfeit beside the sudden certainty that life had turned a corner without waiting for him. What happened next stunned the handlers who count on his predictability and the organizers who had paid for his charisma. Against every line in a professional playbook, but in lockstep with emotion, can cut the trip short. He didn't brief a publicist. He didn't toss an excuse to the cameras. The return flight was booked with the urgency of someone fleeing a fire only he could see. Packing was mechanical. The ride from the hotel to the airport slipped by him as if it belonged to someone else. It wasn't a flight so much as a corridor between selves. The star who lets the crowd do the thinking for him, and the man who knows exactly whose name burns when he closes his eyes. Jealousy wasn't the whole drink, though it colored the rim. This was a resurrection of questions he had stuffed under schedules and signatures. The fear was brutal and familiar, that he had been demoted to a footnote in a story where he'd once believed he was the lead. When he walked into Istanbul airport, the transformation was complete. Usually, Can handles arrivals like a choreographed wink, shades on, charm slick and practiced, the armor gleaming. But this time the armor didn't arrive with him. On a sharp January morning, he looked unguarded, the winter air cutting straight through. The flashbulbs fired with their usual hunger, microphones rose like a thicket, and still he refused to play. No quips. No clever sidestep. He spoke, but the words carried an older ache than any headline could hold. He said his chest felt tight and his spirit felt tired, and he wasn't aiming at the press, he was talking to the space in front of him. When someone dared to say Demet, he didn't pivot or dismiss. He let the name hang, as if it belonged to a story whose ending he suddenly understood. He didn't leave a thread for anyone to spin, because he didn't have one left to offer. This scene, this fragile moment on a marble floor, asks something of us about the people we place on pedestals. We want them bulletproof, but sometimes they are not. Before we uncover the desperate olive branch he stretched out to mend what had unraveled, let me ask you, our Turkish series stars community, do grand gestures ever fix what was broken in silence? Or are some pages glued shut for a reason? Tell us in the comments, we read every word. And if this story pulls you in, a quick like helps us navigate that stormy algorithm. If you believe in the work, the join button makes you part of the backbone that keeps stories like this alive. Once Istanbul swallowed him up again, the stage lights clicked off, and the real drama moved to the smallest, most merciless screen we own. Fueled by jet lag, adrenaline, and a regret that didn't care how famous he was, haunted by that serene photo beside a stranger, Ken did what he had avoided for months. He reached across the silence. He sent a direct message, skipping over agents and assistants. He asked to meet, no public performance, no theater. He asked as the man who knew her coffee order and could tell when her smile was for the camera and when it was for real. He proposed a conversation about what was left strewn between them, the words boxed up and ignored, the choices defended and then regretted, the blame that had taken turns wearing both faces. He wanted to test the ash to see if any heat still lived underneath. And then he waited. In an era where a pulsing chat bubble can feel like a lifeline, time stretched. Minutes lengthened into hours that twisted themselves into a question. He watched a screen as if it could return him to a different year. The lifeline didn't arrive. A verdict did. Demet's reply, say those close enough to know her tone, was measured, unshakably kind, and final. Not the words of someone teetering on indecision. The words of someone who had rehearsed how to protect her peace. She didn't leave breadcrumbs, and she didn't bait hope. She told him that what once felt written in the stars had only ever been a lesson etched in time. She wrote that repeating a mistake doesn't promote it into wisdom, it shrinks you. She explained that her calendar had already turned its page. She was not circling the past for comfort. She was walking forward with purpose. Pay attention to the vocabulary. Words like closed, foolish, and new life don't negotiate. This wasn't a coy refusal that invites a chase. This was the voice of a woman who had grieved privately, stitched herself back together away from the crowd's noise, and chosen a direction that didn't loop back to the beginning. One message didn't decline a coffee, it deleted the sequel he'd been quietly writing in his mind. The aftershock of that clarity was complete. Without the closure he'd hoped could soothe the old bruise, can fold it into himself. The curated rhythm of his social feed. Usually a steady drumbeat, stopped. Collaborators noticed the silence where there is usually a hum. He drifted from the circle that knows his first draft thoughts and stepped into a private inventory. What did I do? What did I miss? What did I assume would wait for me until I was ready? For the first time, observers who chronicle his every move say the golden light has dimmed. Her line about mistakes not needing a second rehearsal follows him like background music he can't shut off. The stories he told himself about what they were, what they could be, evaporated in the plain air of her decision. Meanwhile, the glow around Demet isn't a filter. Friends insist that her New Year's serenity was earned, not posed. She didn't jump into chaos, she arrived at a destination she'd been mapping quietly, footstep by footstep. The identity of the man at her side remains sealed away from the circus, not to drive speculation, but to protect the fragile normalcy she values. This isn't haste, it's the settled calm of someone who believes her future deserves quiet corridors. The audience split in two, as feeds always do. On one side, pragmatists raised her message like a flag of self-respect. You never owe your past the keys to your new house, they argued. Clarity is mercy. On the other side, the romantics, who can't bear to surrender the idea that love endures every storm, begged for one more try. If someone finally speaks from the center of themselves, shouldn't that earn one last conversation? But her words didn't leave room for a debate club. You can't argue with a door locked from the inside. People within the industry have started whispering a darker take. Perhaps we're watching the untangling of a public charm that was never built to carry the weight of accountability. Maybe this is the end of believing performance can substitute for apology. Is his sudden quiet a deliberate pause to face parts of himself he has avoided? Or is it the numbness that comes when you realize you are late to your own life? Back where we began, the Dubai fireworks flared and fell into smoke. That is what brilliance in the sky does. It stuns, and then it disappears. On the ground, though, the consequences linger. For Demet Özdemir, the horizon resembles peace. A weekend that doesn't feel scripted, a slate of work aligned with who she has become, not who the world insists she must be. For Yaman, the most honest view is behind him. He is standing at a bridge he believed he could rebuild whenever courage returned, only to discover that bridges require maintenance, and some rot quietly when they're left unattended. We could make this a fairy tale with saints and villains, but real lives won't stay inside those costumes. What happened belongs to both of them, the late message and the timely boundary, the ache and the relief. Two realities can sit side by side and both be true. And sometimes an ending is not a cliffhanger. Sometimes it's simply an ending. We'll keep listening to the hush around Can and watching the steady forward stride of Demet. Maybe silence is the teacher he needs. Maybe privacy is the only air she'll breathe. Thank you for spending this time with Turkish series stars. If this chapter moved you, leave a like and tell us what you think below. And don't forget, the join button is there if you want to help us keep telling the stories that matter to you. Until next time, take care of your bridges while they still stand.